Welcome back to Daily English Dive. A very warm hello to you wherever you happen to be in the world right now.
Yes, hello. Maybe you are listening to us while washing the dishes in your kitchen, or perhaps you're taking a quiet walk outside.
Exactly. Wherever you are, we are just very glad you're spending this time with us today.
We definitely are. And we have a very specific mission for today's deep dive.
We really do. So we are exploring a fascinating stack of transcripts today, all about a psychological space that every single one of us knows perfectly well.
The comfort zone.
Yes, the comfort zone.
It is a space we all naturally gravitate toward. And today we're going to unpack the underlying reasons why our brains prefer to play it safe.
Right.
We will look at the biological science behind the fear of trying new things, such as speaking a new language.
Which is huge for anyone listening right now.
Exactly. And most importantly, we will discuss how to work with your own psychology. The goal here is to show you how to grow and how to learn without feeling overwhelmed by information or paralyzed by anxiety.
Before we get into the psychology of leaving it, we should probably define what the comfort zone actually is.
That is a great place to start. It basically operates as an invisible box.
An invisible box.
Right. Think about the highly predictable daily routines we fall into without even thinking.
Like waking up at 7 a.m.
Yes, waking up at 7, drinking the exact same cup of black coffee,
Taking the usual bus to work.
sitting in your preferred chair, and coming home to watch the exact same type of TV shows.
That routine feels very warm, it feels predictable and safe.
It does. However, there is a prominent saying from our sources that sets the stage for our discussion today. Nothing grows in the comfort zone.
Nothing grows in the comfort zone. That really captures the core problem with the invisible box, doesn't it?
It really does. The routine is safe, but the moment you try to step one foot outside of that boundary, a very specific biological process begins.
Right.
Let's say you decide you are going to speak English to a stranger today. Instantly, your brain's security system activates.
And this system is heavily managed by a part of your brain called the amygdala.
Yeah, exactly, the amygdala. When you cross the boundary of your normal routine, the amygdala flashes a bright red warning light.
Like a fire alarm going off in your head.
Exactly like that. It sends signals throughout your nervous system telling you to retreat to safety. You experience genuine physical symptoms, your heart rate increases, your chest might feel tight.
And your mind immediately starts generating excuses to avoid the interaction.
Yes, the physical reaction is so strong that we often misinterpret what we are actually afraid of.
We tend to think we are afraid of the action itself. I mean, a learner might think they're simply afraid of the English language or afraid of grammar.
But modern psychology offers a completely different perspective. Our sources introduce a concept called FOPO.
That is FOPO.
Right, which stands for fear of other people's opinions.
Fear of other people's opinions.
Yes, we are not usually terrified of the physical act of speaking English. The real terror comes from the prospect of looking foolish.
We are worried about being judged by the person listening to us.
Precisely. The desire to look perfect is what actually paralyzes us, not the language itself.
So FOPO acts as this invisible barrier to human potential.
It does. And this fear of judgment leads us directly into a major psychological misunderstanding, which researchers call the intuition trap.
The intuition trap. Let's break that down for the listener.
Sure. So when someone feels that heavy, uncomfortable anxiety before trying a new skill, they frequently misread the signal. They think, my intuition is telling me this is a bad idea.
Right. They think, I feel fear. Fear means danger. Therefore, I should stop.
Exactly. But the biological reality is that your brain cannot always tell the difference between a genuine danger signal, like a wild animal approaching, and basic discomfort.
Like trying to remember a new verb tense in English.
Yes, your brain reacts the same way to both.
So the anxiety someone feels when they're about to practice a healthy new skill is not a stop sign at all.
No, not at all. It is just the body misinterpreting the situation. Instead of a stop sign, we should view that feeling as a growth alarm.
A growth alarm. I love that.
If you feel a surge of nervous energy when you are attempting something healthy and new, you are doing the right thing. The discomfort simply means you are waking up your nervous system and pushing against the walls of that invisible box.
Reframing that nervous energy as a growth alarm changes the entire experience of feeling scared. It shifts the context from danger to progress.
It really does.
To illustrate how powerfully this fear of judgment can hold us back, there's a very specific story from our sources that I think we should look at.
Oh, definitely.
It perfectly demonstrates how FOPO paralyzes people. even in situations where there was absolutely no physical danger. I believe it was the story about the sourdough bread.
Yes, the sourdough bread story. That is a prime example of the fear zone in action.
Walk us through what happened there.
So the sources describe someone who decides they want to learn the beautiful artisanal skill of baking fresh sourdough bread. They start by watching hours of YouTube tutorials.
Getting incredibly inspired by the process.
Getting very inspired. They take initial action by going to the store and buying the most expensive flour, specialized yeast, professional baking basket.
They invest fully in the idea.
Right. But the moment they look at the actual recipe and realize they have to mix the dough, the fear zone activates. They are immediately hit with FOPO.
And what are they actually afraid of in that moment? I mean, it is just flour and water.
They start worrying about the outcome and how it will reflect on them. They think, what if the dough is too sticky and I can't handle it? What if I burn it?
Right. What if I post a photo of the final product on Instagram and my friends laugh at my ugly bread?
Exactly. Because of this intense fear of other people's opinions, they take that expensive flour, put it in the back of a freezing cold cupboard, and avoid touching it for 3 entire months.
3 months of complete paralysis over theoretical bread.
Yes. It highlights how the mere anticipation of a mistake can stop us from taking any action whatsoever.
But the story has a turning point.
It does. Eventually, the person gets frustrated by their own avoidance. They realize they are letting a bag of flour intimidate them.
Right.
So they finally mix the dough, and it goes terribly. It sticks to their hands. It makes a mess of the kitchen table. And when they finally put it in the oven and pull it out later, it is a solid gray rock.
A solid gray rock.
Yes. It is as hard as a brick and completely inedible.
So the absolute worst case scenario that their amygdala was warning them about actually happened.
Their biggest fear materialized. They completely failed at baking the bread. But the critical takeaway is what happens next.
Right. They didn't die.
They didn't die. The world did not end. They sat in their kitchen, looked at this inedible gray rock, and they just started laughing.
Their friends didn't hate them, and they were perfectly safe.
Exactly. That moment of laughter represents the exact border crossing from the fear zone into the learning zone.
The tension breaks the moment you realize the failure isn't fatal. Entering that learning zone seems to require a deliberate mental shift. How do we categorize that shift in psychology?
It requires a process called cognitive reframing. You have to actively change your internal definition of a mistake.
Because while you are trapped in the fear zone, a mistake feels like a tragedy or a personal flaw.
Yes. But once you cross into the learning zone, a mistake is no longer a failure. A mistake becomes data.
Data. Just raw information.
Just raw information telling you what happened when you took a specific action.
We treat it like information we might input into a computer system. The result isn't good or bad. It is just a readout of the current variables.
The sources reference a historical analogy here with the famous inventor Thomas Edison. During his attempts to invent the practical light bulb, Edison experienced thousands of unsuccessful trials.
Right.
When a reporter asked him how it felt to fail 10,000 times, Edison famously replied that he didn't fail at all. He simply found 10,000 ways that didn't work.
He viewed every single broken filament and shattered glass bulb purely as data.
Yes. Applying that reframing to the bread story, the brick-hard loaf isn't a personal failure. It is simply data indicating that the baker needs to add more water or change the oven temperature next time.
That makes total sense. For someone listening right now who is learning English, using the wrong vocabulary word in a conversation is not a disaster.
Not at all. The native speaker probably still understands the context of the sentence, and the learner now has the exact data they need to correct that specific word for the next conversation.
The data collection process is essential, though we do have to acknowledge that gathering this data does not feel very glamorous.
No, it does not. It is a highly uncomfortable process.
It definitely brings us to an unavoidable reality, the awkward phase.
Yes.
The awkward phase.
Anyone who has tried to apply a new grammar rule in real time, or even tried learning a new dance step, knows the feeling. You feel like a clumsy robot.
A very clumsy robot. Every movement or word feels unnatural, heavy, and forced. Do we ever stop feeling that clumsiness, or is it just a permanent part of learning?
The clumsiness is temporary, but there is a very real biological reason it happens in the first place. It comes down to a concept called neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity.
The term refers to your brain's ability to physically change, adapt, and build new pathways.
Okay.
When you perform a familiar routine inside your invisible box, like speaking your native language or sitting on your usual sofa, your brain is functioning like a car driving on a very old, very smooth, well-paved highway.
The journey takes absolutely zero energy.
Zero energy. Your brain loves this efficiency.
But the moment we try to learn a new skill, we are no longer on that paved highway.
Right. When you attempt a new skill, your brain is forced to build a brand new road. Furthermore, it isn't building this road on an empty, flat field. It is trying to build a road through a thick, wild, overgrown jungle.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. Creating that new neural pathway requires a massive amount of physical effort and energy from your brain cells. That intense biological exertion is the exact reason why learning a language feels exhausting, clumsy, and awkward at first.
So you really have to remind yourself, every master was once a disaster.
Exactly. Every master was once a disaster. That awkwardness is biological proof that your brain is actively growing.
Every master was once a disaster. That is a highly encouraging way to look at the learning process. The awkwardness is literally the feeling of the jungle being cleared.
Yes, it is the sound of construction in your brain.
So if a learner survives the fear zone, gathers their data in the learning zone, and allows their brain to build these new roads through the jungle, what is the final destination of this process?
The destination is the growth zone. To understand how the growth zone functions, we look at the elastic band theory.
The elastic band theory.
Let's look at the comfort zone like a small rubber band. When you step out into the fear zone and begin working in the learning zone, you are pulling on that rubber band. You are stretching it wide. Right.
The tension you feel in the rubber band represents the fear, the FOPO, and the biological awkwardness we just discussed.
It feels incredibly tight, almost like it might snap if you pull it any further.
The tension is uncomfortable, but the biological payoff happens after the initial struggle.
Wow.
Once you master that new skill, for instance, once you successfully navigate a 10-minute conversation in English without reverting to your native language, the rubber band relaxes.
Okay, it relaxes.
But the crucial part of this theory is that the rubber band never shrinks back to its original small size.
The baseline has changed. Your comfort zone is permanently expanded.
You did not destroy your safe space. You simply increased its square footage. Now, having a 10-minute English conversation exists inside your warm, safe, predictable box. It no longer triggers the amygdala.
That structural change in the brain makes a lot of sense. However, I want to push back a little on how this is often presented to us.
Okay, go ahead.
When we talk about expanding the comfort zone or making big changes, modern social media makes the process look incredibly extreme.
It certainly does. We constantly see these massive, dramatic life changes online. People post things like, "I quit my boring corporate job, sold all my belongings, and moved to Bali to teach yoga on the beach."
Right, the Bali yoga post.
It makes growth look like an explosive event.
The Bali yoga narrative is a very common trap. It feeds into a cognitive bias known as the all-or-nothing fallacy. We start to internalize the life explosion myth.
The life explosion myth.
We begin to believe that in order to experience any real personal growth, we must completely detonate our current lives and start from scratch.
Which is incredibly impractical. Most people have rent to pay, families to support, or simply a cat to feed.
Yes.
When the only option for growth appears to be moving to Bali, people tend to think, well, I can't do that, so I suppose I'll just stay on my sofa forever.
And your brain enthusiastically supports the sofa option.
Because of that paved highway we talked about.
Exactly. And this is due to a biological drive called homeostasis. Homeostasis is the body and brain's desire to keep all systems perfectly stable, balanced, and predictable in order to conserve energy.
So it actively fights against the life explosion.
Because your brain heavily prioritizes homeostasis, contemplating a giant leap like moving across the world or suddenly speaking only English for an entire day is deeply terrifying to your nervous system.
Your amygdala hits the emergency brake.
The tension on the rubber band feels too high, and you end up doing absolutely nothing.
But wait, taking tiny steps feels so slow. If I want to be fluent in English quickly, shouldn't I just force myself to go to a busy networking event and speak for 3 hours? Shouldn't I just rip the Band-Aid off and force the growth?
If you try to rip the Band-Aid off and force 3 hours of intense discomfort, your amygdala will likely trigger a full systemic shutdown.
Really?
Yes. You might experience a panic attack, or the experience will be so traumatic that your brain will build a negative association with the English language, making you avoid it entirely in the future.
That is the exact opposite of what we want.
To bypass the amygdala's security system, we have to borrow a tool from clinical psychology. It is a method used to treat severe phobias called systematic desensitization.
Systematic desensitization. Let's break down how that actually works in practice.
Systematic implies a careful step-by-step approach. Desensitization means gradually making your nervous system less sensitive to a specific fear.
Okay.
If a clinical psychologist has a patient who is terrified of spiders, they do not throw a box of live spiders onto the patient's lap on the very first day of therapy.
That would be the equivalent of the 3-hour networking event. It would cause total panic.
Instead, the psychologist uses microdoses of fear. On the first day, the patient might simply sit across the room and look at a photograph of a spider for a few seconds.
That's a photograph.
Yes. A week later, they might look at a small plastic toy spider. It is a slow, deliberate progression that does not trigger the amygdala's full alarm system. We can apply this exact same science to our own language goals using a concept called micro-courage.
Micro-courage.
Yeah.
That is a brilliant alternative to the all-or-nothing fallacy. You don't need to jump out of an airplane to experience growth. You just need to open a window.
Exactly. Jumping out of the plane is deciding your very first step is going to a crowded bar in central London to debate politics in English with strangers. That puts too much immediate tension on the rubber band.
So what is opening a window?
Opening a window is deciding to write one single comment on a YouTube video in English, or reading one short news article.
Or choosing to say good morning to the barista at your local coffee shop instead of just pointing at the menu. It is a tiny, manageable dose of bravery.
Precisely.
Even with micro-courage, though, there is still that brief moment where your heart beats fast right before you take the action. How do we push past that final second of hesitation when we are standing in front of the barista?
The solution to that final hesitation is a behavioral tool known as the 20-second rule.
The 20-second rule.
One of our biggest cultural misconceptions is the belief that brave people are simply fearless all the time. Courage is not a permanent personality trait. It is a temporary, fleeting burst of energy.
It's just a quick burst.
You do not need to sustain bravery for a whole day, an hour, or even a minute. You only need 20 seconds of intense, slightly embarrassing courage.
When you measure out the actual time required to initiate an action, 20 seconds is more than enough. How long does it actually take to click the send button on an email you drafted in English? 1 second.
Right.
How long does it take to physically raise your hand in a virtual meeting? 2 seconds. How long does it take to walk up to a colleague and say, "Hello, how was your weekend?" 5 seconds.
Once you utilize those few seconds of action, the choice is made and the boundary is crossed. Momentum takes over from there.
The physics just carry you forward.
If you say hello, the other person will respond naturally. Your brain will automatically begin searching its database for the appropriate vocabulary words. The hardest part of any task is always the anticipation.
Just the waiting.
If you can force your physical body to move for just 20 seconds, the hardest part is instantly behind you.
So we use 20 seconds of micro-courage to initiate the action. But we still have to deal with the feeling that arrives immediately after we act. Sometimes, right after you use those 20 seconds to speak, you stumble over your words. You feel that heavy clumsiness and awkwardness we discussed earlier.
That immediate post-action awkwardness stops a lot of learners from ever trying a second time. However, behavioral economics provides a highly effective mindset shift for this specific problem.
What kind of mindset shift?
We must stop viewing awkwardness as a punishment for making a mistake. Instead, you need to view it as a transaction. It is the awkward tax.
A tax, similar to the financial tax you pay to a government.
It operates on the exact same principle. Everything valuable in life has a corresponding price. If you want to acquire a house, you have to pay the financial price.
Right.
If you want to build physical strength, you must pay the price in sweat and muscle soreness. If you want to acquire language fluency, achieve personal growth, and permanently expand your comfort zone, the required currency is awkwardness. You cannot get the result without paying the tax.
Viewing awkwardness as the currency of growth completely changes the emotional weight of the feeling. When you feel silly or clumsy while speaking English, you are not failing a test. You are simply paying the required awkward tax to purchase your future fluency.
Every time you stumble over a sentence, you are handing over the currency needed to stretch your elastic band.
Let's take a moment to look back at the conceptual journey we have mapped out today. We started inside the invisible box of our daily routines, recognizing that the fear keeping us trapped is rarely physical danger.
It is usually just FOPO, the fear of other people's opinions.
We discuss how to survive the amygdala's growth alarm by stepping into the learning zone, where we turn our embarrassing failures into objective data, much like Edison did with his light bulbs.
We analyzed the biology of the awkward phase, understanding that clumsiness is just the feeling of our brain building new roads through a thick jungle of neuroplasticity. We also discarded the life explosion myth in favor of systematic desensitization.
We rely on tiny doses of microcourage, knowing that just 20 seconds of bravery is enough to start the momentum. And finally, we learn to willingly pay the awkward tax to permanently expand our comfort zone.
Which brings us to a final call to action for you listening right now. The source has provided a practical challenge, and we want to pass it directly to you. What is your 20-second microcourage step for this week?
Think about one tiny, specific action regarding your English learning that you have been avoiding. Just identifying that step right now is your first move toward growth.
As you consider what that 20-second step might be, I want to leave you with one final thought to consider. If our comfort zone is truly just an invisible box that we have constructed out of our own daily habits and routines, it means those boundaries are not actually made of fear.
What are they made of?
The walls are simply made of unmade decisions. What is one tiny decision you can make today that will push that invisible wall just a single millimeter further?
A single millimeter makes all the difference over time. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the comfort zone. We hope you feel a little more equipped to step outside your visible box today. Keep gathering data, keep paying that awkward tax, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye, and take care.